Well, hello, and thank you, and welcome to this webinar that features an update of the Strong Foundations report that SHIO issued in 2010. We're focusing specifically in this update on the data sharing activities of state post-secondary agencies and entities. My name is Tanya Garcia, and with me is my SHIO colleague and co-author, Hans Larange. But before I turn it over to Hans, I'd like to share some webinar basics and housekeeping. Due to the large response, attendees will not be able to speak in the conference through the telephone audio, but it will be available through your computer speakers only. Please have appropriate headphones or speakers ready to go. We have prepared about 20 minutes of content in these slides, so there is plenty of time for questions and comments. And even though there will be a dedicated Q&A period at the end of the webinar, we strongly urge you and invite you to ask questions throughout. The best way to ask questions in the webinar room is by typing them into the Q&A box provided on the right-hand side of your screen. In order to see this box, you may have to click the icon that looks like a question mark at the upper right corner of your screen. You may also use the chat system, but we will not be monitoring this as panelists. Only the Q&A window will be monitored. During this dedicated Q&A period at the end, we as panelists, Hans and I, may read your question out loud and then answer it through the audio system, or we may choose to bypass your question and answer it later offline. Questions will generally not be answered through text. Last but not least, if you have any difficulties during this webinar, please feel free to contact our IT administrator, Chris Ott, COTT@shio.org. And if you experience technical difficulty that can't be resolved, we are recording this webinar and we'll make it available online for viewing by this afternoon. So, that's it for me, and I'd like to turn it over to Hans, and it's all yours, Hans.
Thank you, Tanya, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Really appreciate your taking the time out of your busy schedules to get this update on the Strong Foundations. Let me start by just visiting a little bit of the earlier history. Back in 2010, SHIO issued the first Strong Foundations report that identified and described the various characteristics of state post-secondary data systems. And this included the types of data collected, the uses of those data, the reports that were generated, and data sharing practices. That study focused on state higher education coordinating boards and governing boards, state agencies with student unit record systems, or SURs. An SUR, for the purposes of our conversation today, we're describing as data systems that collect data for each student attending colleges and universities in each state, but that does not mean that all students from all colleges are included in these systems. And moreover, there's quite a bit of variation from state to state and even within states as to the type of student data collected, both in the breadth and the depth. And in the states, for example, where there are multiple agencies, there may in fact be different data collection within those agencies in that same state. So this focus is primarily on the data sharing practices of these state post-secondary agencies and entities. That's what we're trying to do with the 2012 focus. Due to some limitations, we were unable to conduct a full update of the original report, but we may be able to do that in the future. What do we mean by data sharing activities? We're talking about the relationships that state post-secondary entities have with other partners in the state. The data relationships, whether they're a P20 data warehouse, a one-way exchange with one or more state agencies, or as a two-way exchange with multiple agencies. This replicates the 2009 study. It includes Now let me back up. The 2009 study is replicated with one exception. The California Post-Secondary Education Commission no longer exists, as funding for this agency was discontinued in November 2011. As was the case in 2009, this update includes more than one post-secondary agency or entity in 10 states. 10 states have more than one agencies, and we included those in order to capture a more accurate picture of the state post-secondary data collection in these states. So, moving on, our first finding. We actually came to two conclusions as a result of this update, none of which was terribly surprising, but the first one is, as was the case 3 years ago, the most common data sharing agreement exists between the state post-secondary agency or entities and the state education, the K-12 folks, and or the labor and workforce agencies. Many states are now able to supplement the post-secondary data with data from K-12 and labor data, and the end result is that state post-secondary entities are much better able to follow students from cradle to career. Our second main finding is that while post-secondary agencies and entities are no strangers to data sharing with K-12 and others, the SLDS grant application requirements for state K-12 agencies to partner with their post-secondary and labor counterparts has accelerated and expanded data sharing across the country. A very conservative comparison of the states that received SLDS grants in the last 3 years with the state post-secondary agencies featured in this report suggests that these grants seem to have directly influenced the increase in coordinated multi-sector data sharing with at least 30 of the 39 states. You can certainly read more about this influence in the report. I would encourage you to do so. So with those two main findings, that a lot of data sharing agreements exist between post-secondary and K-12 and labor, and that the SLDS grant application has probably accelerated the sharing, we're going to dig now into some of the more specific details. Tanya will in fact go over those, and let me make her the presenter.
Thank you, Hans. So following up on yes, okay. So following up on the second conclusion that Hans just presented, sharing data via inclusion in state P20 data warehouses or federated data models has emerged as one of the other options available to state post-secondary agencies and entities who wish to increase their data sharing capacity with others. Based on the feedback that I got from study respondents, I am now referring to this phenomenon as coordinated multi-sector data sharing, a much broader term that includes both state P20 data warehouses as well as federated data models. And what distinguishes the former from the latter is that in the latter, there is no central repository for storing data. Rather, the data gets pulled from the partner's data systems each time the data is matched. And if anyone would like to elaborate in the Q&A section or later on at the end of the webinar on the distinction between these two, we would welcome your thoughts on what further distinguishes the two. So, hold on, sorry. For some reason I'm not getting the next slide here. There we go. So some of you may know that state post-secondary SURs have been around since the late 70s, whereas state K-12 agencies have, for the most part, been developing their SURs since 2005, when the first round of SLDS grants were awarded. So this type of sharing was simply not possible until recently. What you're seeing right now is Figure 1 from the report, and it shows states with multi-sector data sharing where the state post-secondary agency plays a role. Back in '09, the 8 states in yellow had a state P20 data warehouse or federated data model, and today the number has grown to 19 states, including DC, that have established such structures, for lack of a better word. The states in yellow and red are those states. 20 additional states that are shown in gray are in the process of creating this multi-sector data sharing. I want to elaborate a little bit. The K-12 agencies in Alaska, Idaho, and Iowa have been awarded SLDS grants in the past 3 years in partnership with their post-secondary and labor counterparts. And so really the total number of states with coordinated multi-sector data sharing that includes the post-secondary sector is actually 42, including DC. And I want to just state for the record, in '09 when we did this study, we excluded the state post-secondary entities in Delaware, Idaho, Iowa, Nebraska, New Hampshire, and Puerto Rico because they did not have student unit record systems at the time. And Michigan does not have a state post-secondary agency, so we also did not include them. But of these states that I've just mentioned, Idaho, Iowa, and Michigan have received SLDS grants, and they're in the process of building those. In the last round that was awarded last year, Delaware, Nebraska, New Hampshire, and Puerto Rico received SLDS grants, but rather the focus there in those states is for them to develop their K-12 data systems. The last thing I wanted to mention is that it was beyond the scope of this update to detail which of these data sharing relationships originated as individual agreements as part of a state's effort to build a P20 data warehouse or federated data model or both. So we unfortunately don't have the details on that. So here we have the previous slide showed a specific data sharing trend, and this slide, Table 1 from the report, shows a more general picture of data sharing regardless of how it's carried out. I want to note that there was an error in the original Table 1 in the report that has been corrected in this slide and in the updated report on our website, which we'll share with you later. So I want to note that many individual data sharing agreements trace their roots to data reporting requirements associated with state laws. And so because of that, it should not be assumed that the existence and pending development of state P20 data warehouses or federated data models will replace these existing data sharing agreements, unless there is a change in state law, that is. So compared with the 42 states in 2009 that had data sharing agreements with one or more state agencies, all 45 states that are featured in this update are now engaged in this type of data sharing. And further, 80% of the respondents to this update have between 1 and 4 data sharing agreements. And in the next slide, I want to talk a little bit more about the 20% that have between 5 and 11 such relationships. So here we're going to quickly go through the states. So Washington has the most with 11. They have 11 data sharing agreements. This is the Washington Office of Financial Management. Next we have the Rhode Island Board of Governors. They have 10, but to clarify, they currently have 7 with 3 in progress. The next one is 8. The Florida Department of Education has 8 data sharing agreements, and this is followed by Alaska with 6. And finally, we have Georgia, New York, Kansas, North Dakota, and Oregon, each with 5 data sharing agreements. And I want to clarify that Kansas currently has 4 and 1 is in progress. So some of the other agencies that these post-secondary entities have are with financial aid agencies, pre-K, foster care, health, motor vehicle, juvenile detention, and corrections. And if any of the panelists would like to share in the Q&A or later on anything else about that's specific about these, sorry, I was reading a remark. We'd like to hear your comments on that. And the one that I just, Michigan offered to correct some of the information that we have, so we will do that. So now I want to go back to the table 1 that we previously showed you, because we want to focus now for almost the rest of the presentation on the most common data sharing agreements that the state post-secondary entities engage in, and those are with the state K-12 and labor agencies. So this is a trend that was evident back in 2009 and remains the case today. So here we go. So before we begin with these figures, I want to state that several respondents in this 2012 update issued corrections to the information they provided in 2009. So any 2009 numbers and figures in this report have been adjusted where appropriate and as requested. So the figure on the left shows the situation back in 2009 with regard to states with where the post-secondary entity has a data sharing agreement with the K-12 and/or labor workforce agency. And the figure on the right shows what the phenomenon looks like as of 2012. So look at how much more purple there is today. Those are the states with data sharing agreements with both the K-12 and labor agencies. And these are, for your reference, figures 2 and 3 from the report. So I want to just state again that please to keep in mind that these arrangements may or may not take place via the state P20 data warehouses or federated data model. We just don't know exactly. And so we wanted to point that out. So. The next slide shows the data sharing agreements that are currently in progress. And here again on the left, we show what the situation was back in 2009 with regard to the post-secondary data sharing agreements that were in progress with the state K-12 and labor workforce agencies, when the figure on the right shows what it looks like as of 2012. These are figures 4 and 5 from the report, and I wanted to point out that back in 2009, in Illinois, the Board of Higher Education was in the process of sharing data with both K-12 and labor, and a lot has changed since then in terms of the creation of a state P20 data warehouse. And so what the figure on the right shows is that the agreement with K-12 is up and running, and they're still working on the data sharing agreement with labor. So the next slide, we go into, it's great that these data sharing agreements exist, but what we found out and we continue to confirm is that the vast majority of these state post-secondary agencies or entities with data sharing agreements with the state K-12 agency also have access to these elements. And the figure on the left shows what it looked like back in 2009 in terms of access to K-12 data elements. And I want to point out that back in 2009, Maryland, North Dakota, and Pennsylvania, they all had data sharing agreements with their state K-12 agency, but it was a one-way exchange, and it did not allow access to K-12 for these entities. And you'll see the figure on the right shows what it looks like as of 2012, and you'll note there that there are no longer any states that are in that same category anymore. All of the states that have data sharing agreements with the K-12 agency either have access to elements or are in the process of obtaining access. And these are figures 6 and 7 from the report. The last thing I wanted to note was that the state post-secondary entities in California, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Vermont, and West Virginia, They are among the states that obtain K-12 elements via the institutions of higher education that report data to these state post-secondary agencies. And so it doesn't mean, just because there isn't a data sharing agreement with K-12 doesn't mean that these state-level entities don't have access to K-12 elements. And what we found with these last states that I just mentioned is that high school attended, high school graduation date, and high school GPA are among the K-12 elements that the institutions of higher education collect and then share with the state post-secondary agencies. For those of you who want to learn more about this, Appendix C has more detailed information. So we just talked about the K-12 agencies, and again, we see the same kind of trend in terms of those with data sharing agreements with the labor agency. There is a lot of access to labor data as a result. So the figure on the left shows the situation back in 2009 in terms of access to labor data elements, and back in that year, Maine, Mississippi, and North Dakota, they had data sharing agreements with the labor agency, but it did not include access to these labor data elements. And now in 2012, you can see that everyone either has access to labor elements or is in the process of gaining access. So I'd like to point out that the legends aren't exactly the same, just so you can keep that in mind. But we will definitely keep watching this phenomenon because many more states are getting access to labor elements. So, of course, I've gone over the K-12 and labor access to elements, and you're probably wondering, okay, who has access to both? Well, that's what this slide shows. This is what it looked like in 2009 in terms of access to both K-12 and labor elements. And here's what it looks like today. The number of states where this, K-12 and labor access to these data elements has doubled in the last 3 years. And, this has been a pretty dramatic change and will continue to change as we see some of these new SLDS grant partnerships lead to greater data sharing and greater abilities for states to know what happens to students. These are figures 10 and 11 from the report. So some of you who know me know how curious I am about all of these things, and as I was putting together the slides for this presentation, I wanted to know, okay, you already have access to K-12 elements. What additional access have you obtained in the last 3 years? And here's what I found. These are, again, only the states who already have access and who expanded their access to K-12 elements. And the most commonly added elements for these states are disability status, state student enrolled in high school course type, and high school assessment scores. So these are states that are able to learn more about the types of students that are graduating from high schools in their states. And just to get a closer look at this phenomenon, we wanted to look overall what happened to access to K-12 elements in the last 3 years. And the elements that we looked at, I want to stress that we only looked at 14 K-12 elements. We didn't look at the whole gamut. But when you put together the states with existing as well as new access to K-12 elements, here's what it looks like. So the numbers are next to the states and entities that responded in this survey. And here I've circled the states with the highest number of access to the elements that we examined. And Washington, Utah, Hawaii, Kansas, Missouri, Wisconsin, Kentucky, Georgia, Florida, DC, and Rhode Island are all states to look at in terms of who has greater access to K-12 elements from the state K-12 agency. So back to the labor side, I was also curious, okay, of those who already have access to labor elements, who expanded their access in the last 3 years? And this is what it looks like. We found out that the most commonly added elements are the NAICS code, which stands for the North American Industry Classification System, as well as the NAICS title. So those are the states that expanded their access. And a closer look at the overall national picture of who has access to labor elements. And again, I want to stress that we only looked at 16 labor elements in this for this question. And so when you put together the states who already had access and have new access to labor elements, here's what it looks like. And you can see that there are a lot of states here that have access to labor data. And here I've circled the states with the highest number of access to the elements, and those are in Washington, Arkansas, and Indiana. And before, I know many people are obsessed with, oh, how many elements does each state have access to? I just wanted to point out that the California Community Colleges does a lot with the one labor element that they have access to, which is wages earned. So this is just a snapshot of what states have access to. Don't think that some states are better than others because of how many labor elements they have access to. It's just a snapshot of what they have. And so that's all we have for you for now. And I'm going to turn it back to Hans to moderate the Q&A portion. So thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. Obviously, you've seen a lot of slides, a lot of data. There's a lot of activity that's going on, increased activity that's going on since we first did this a couple of years ago. I think the other thing that has come out in the study is that it's not everybody doing things the same way. As we pointed out earlier, some are P20 data warehouses, some are two-way data exchanges, some are one-way exchanges. And some states have got access to a lot of elements, some have access to a smaller number of elements. But bottom line, there's a lot going on in what we're increasingly calling the P20W world. And so we'd like to see if you have any questions that we might be able to address now, or any thoughts and what you've seen so far. And so if you have, please go ahead and enter those into the Q&A section on the right-hand side of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer them now or find answers for you later.
And Hans, I see here that we don't have any Q&A questions just yet, and so I'm going to, oh, here we go. And I guess the first question is, from your communications with the states, did you get the sense that the earlier Strong Foundations report played a role in states making progress on data linking? Well, I would like to say the answer is yes, but I'd like to actually open it up, and I think I might just, since we don't have a lot of questions, I'm going to unmute, and if you want to mute your conversation,
in the data set.
Maybe, sorry about that. I don't know if people can raise their hand or something, but maybe not.
Well, Tanya, I think one thing we can say, and some of the states can, in fact, reference what happened in their states. But when the first version of Strong Foundations came out, we knew we got a lot of comments from folks along the lines of, gee, I'm not doing this yet, but it looks like lots of other folks are. We're starting to pay attention, so it's good to know that other people are doing the same thing. So I think, while we can't say that the Strong Foundations report played a strong role, it certainly continued to draw attention to the issue and reinforce the notion among the states that there was this activity that was going on and people were interested in just kind of jumping in. We got another question here. The elements, are they a particular format like CEDS or IPEDS? Tanya, do you want to jump in on that? I mean, things are generally IPEDS related here, and of course CEDS and IPEDS are very closely linked now, but other thoughts that you've got there?
I think, in the 09 report, we asked this question as to whether, what were the definition sources of the elements that, were collected in these state post-secondary data systems, and we unfortunately weren't able to ask this question again in this update. But what I do know is that in our work on the Common Education Data Standards project, we know for a fact that Illinois is among the states that use the CEDS elements as a reference point in the creation of their longitudinal data system. And so I'm sure that more and more states will fall into this category, especially the ones that just received SLDS grants, because I believe that was one of the encouragements in the grant application, especially for this last round of grants that were awarded. The other point I wanted to state about the Strong Foundations report and whether it played a role is that I also think the statewide longitudinal data systems grant program, the federal SLDS grant program, played a significant role in increasing data sharing, because back in 09, it literally made it a requirement for K-12 agencies to partner with their post-secondary and labor counterparts as part of the grant application. And so I think that's another factor in terms of the increase in data sharing.
We've got a question here, what's happening between the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Labor to increase the sharing of data both within the states and across the states. I know that conversations continue between DOE and Labor, but I'm not aware of anything firm that has come out. I know interest continues to be high at the federal level between the federal agencies, but there's not anything specific. I think part of what's happening is that it's the use of the grants to encourage these kinds of relations. And then we've got a related question: how are the links being established to workforce data? I've heard that the question goes on. I've heard from most states they're not able to link K-20 records to workforce records at the state level. What did I miss? Well, it's a challenge. There's no doubt about that. But it is being done. Where it's being done, and Tanya, you can correct me on this, where it's being done, it involves a Social Security number.
That's right.
That's what labor requires.
Yeah. That's right, and there are states, some of you know, I used to work in New Mexico at the Higher Education Department, and in New Mexico, the K-12 agency did not collect Social Security number, and I know that one of the efforts that they're trying to make right now is to kind of obtain the SSN for students who actually go into a New Mexico public institution and kind of feed that information back to the K-12 agency as a way to obtain that information. But I'm sure other states have come up with different elements to use in the matching process that are as effective as having the Social Security number. But it really, because the post-secondary agencies and entities are in charge of or administer federal financial aid programs, they're the ones most likely to be able to provide that link between K-12 and labor.
Tanya, I don't know if you can see the questions here.
Yes.
We had you can, okay. We had a follow-up on are there states that have had success using other matching processes? We have state law prohibiting us from collecting Social Security number, and that is, we know that's true in a number of cases. I don't know if we have firm evidence of states using other matching algorithms that go beyond Social Security number. Tanya, did you dig into that at all?
Well, this update did not, but the 09 report, not the report, but the data collection did involve a series of questions as to which elements were used in the matching process. And I will be happy to share that with those on this call in a follow-up. But we do have that information. And right off the top of my head, I can't remember who does not use Social Security number, but I do know that there are states who are able to do that without that data element.
Well, and how about states that link K-12 to labor? We know that's happening, but that wasn't the focus of our study.
That's right. And I think, you know, the data quality campaign is probably a really good source of information on that topic specifically. Let's see. I also wanted to say, before, in response to one of the comments, remember that we did this update on the same respondents that we surveyed in 2009, with the exception of the California Post-Secondary Commission. And some of the states that weren't included in that update were also not included in this one, but we hope to be able to include more, state agencies responsible for statewide data collection if we're able to do this update at a larger scale the next time around. And so that's why some of the states were not shaded in the slides that we presented.
Well, we've also got a question here about the use of labor wage records in vocational technical education program monitoring at the sub-baccalaureate level. This study did not go into that level of detail, but I know that interest is high at both the federal level and in state houses for that kind of a level of data collection. Tanya, is there something you want to add to that?
Not at the moment.
Okay.
That's correct. We weren't able to elaborate on the specific uses in this update.
Another question on the significant challenges and objections in participation and data sharing. Have these issues significantly changed since 2010? I don't know that they have. I mean, quick comment, and Tanya can add in. The objections continue to be FERPA. They continue to be ownership. They continue to be, quite frankly, lack of confidence in other agencies' ability to manage data correctly and keep it safe. So, but I do believe that the processes that are going on, the fact that we've got more states that are actually working on this, means that those issues have to be addressed, that they're paying attention within their states with multi-agency conversations about how they can get around or address some of those challenges like FERPA, like ownership of data, like cost sharing. Tanya, did we ask we didn't ask specific questions this time around for the challenges, did we?
We did not, but the only thing I'll add to that, Hans, is that the revised FERPA guidelines that came out, what was it, a year ago,
Yes.
Really did a lot to clarify and to try to simplify the kinds of data sharing that can occur, and I think that that has been a positive development and has basically given states the legal cover that to share data more freely with other state agencies in their state.
Let me add another piece here, just put in a plug for another study that's going on right now with our colleagues at the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education, WICHE, a project headed up by Brian Prescott. And I think many of you are aware of this project that's looking at data sharing between K-12, post-secondary, and labor in 4 states, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Hawaii. They're right in the middle of the data matching process as we speak, and I would encourage folks to go to the WICHE website to pay attention to that project, because those kinds of concerns, objections, challenges are exactly what has meant this project, which we thought might have been a year or two, is now extending on to 3 or 4. It's going to be quicker the next time around, the next time somebody does something like this, or if WICHE is able to expand it, because a lot of lessons have been learned there. But the biggest challenges, to my mind, were legal ones, and then the need to have common technical standards. CEDS helped a lot there, and quite frankly, the policy folks need to be pushing on this as well within the states, because everybody's already got a full-time job in the state agencies, whether it be K-12, post-secondary, or labor, and this is, work on top. So it is important, it is critical. The fact that we've seen a lot of increase in the number of in the amount of activity and the number of states involved, I think reinforces the value that they have. But these challenges are still there and need to be kind of worked out on a face-to-face basis. I think one of the things WICHE did, which was quite frankly brilliant, is they got all the folks and the various agencies in the same room together, and they started having conversations, and that's what it's going to take. We've got another question here on are the SSNs going to be shared out instead of a unique identifier number? What's happening in the various states, it differs from state to state, but bottom line, SSN to labor is still the primary means of accessing that data, so it's a little hard to do it without an SSN, though as Tanya noted, that we know some states that are in fact doing that, and she'll share that information as soon as she can.
That's right.
Do we have other questions, other thoughts or concerns?
And I just wanted to let those who submitted questions via the chat instead of the Q&A portion, we will certainly address your questions and comments offline. If there aren't any more Q&A questions, I think, Hans, we might go to the next slide. And I wanted to share with you that this website that's listed at the top there contains everything associated with this report. The full report. We will also be posting the webinar slides and audio. It also contains a list of the individual responses from each responding agency or entity that participated. And so that gives you a detailed information of what they answered for each of the 6 questions that we asked. And the last part I wanted to point out was that there's a lot of downloadable data. We've made all the maps that are in the report available as PowerPoint slides, and we encourage you to use them freely in your own presentations. And we'll be posting this webinar up, which has some slides that aren't in the report. But we ask that you just cite the source where you got it from, and if there's anything that is not on this page, we encourage you to reach out to us if you want us to prepare the data sliced and diced in a different format, and we will be more than happy to create maps and tables or other resources for your purposes.
Tanya, let me add one other point here in response to one of the chat comments. I think the staff burden issue post-2008 budget cuts is significant, and it's hard to tell where we might have been otherwise if that hadn't happened. I think it just reinforces the value of the federal SLDS grants in making this a reality. Our challenge now is at the state level to be able to demonstrate enough value out of these linkages, out of these arrangements, such that the ongoing fiscal support is there. Legislators pay for the resources that help them set effective policy in their states, and so it's incumbent upon all of us that work on this to make this one of those resources that states have to maintain. The other question that came up is an issue around FERPA liability between non-state entities and agencies. This particular study was focusing just on state agencies and entities, and agreed that when you go beyond that, it turns into a very different, has potential to turn into a very different kind of conversation. And this is where authorized parties doing research on behalf of the state and all the language around that in the FERPA regulations start to play a role. So we're happy to answer more questions. We have the time if people have the questions, but if we don't have any, here's our contact information, and we encourage you to take a look at our website. We have a new website at SHIO, so take a look at that just to see the changes there. But the page that Tanya referenced previously on Strong Foundations will have a lot of this information, and obviously going to the website, you'll be able to get to Strong Foundations state data systems from the home page, I believe. So, Tanya, other thoughts, other comments?
That's it for me, and I can't believe we're 10 minutes ahead of schedule, and I want to also thank everyone for joining us today. And I also wanted to add that some of you might have seen in the news today that the Aspen Institute released a report on uses of labor data and how to go about obtaining that information. And I'll share the link to that report because I think it's a good guide for how to go about establishing that access to labor data that we might all learn a little bit from.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for your interest. Again, hit the website to get a copy of the report, send questions our way, help us to help you to continue to encourage the development of this data sharing so that we can really have the most comprehensive understanding that we possibly can have around the flow of students through the entire education and labor environment, and to continue to encourage our policymakers to make changes that in fact improve their ability to move through that environment. So again, thank you all very much. Thank you for your time today, and since we're almost midday in Colorado on Thursday, I can feel comfortable saying have a good weekend.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.